Hey Chem Starts, Ms. McCauley. We're going to be going over Chapter 2 Practice, pages 19 and 20, and that's Section 2.3.2, Significant Figures in Calculation. So this is the whole point of SigFigs. Why do we spend all that time identifying them? It's because they are what tell us how to round our answers to. So here's the most important rule. When multiplying and dividing, limit and round to the least number of significant figures in any of the factors. So here's an example. We have 23.0 centimeters times 432 centimeters times 19 centimeters, okay? Your calculator would tell you this super precise answer. So you'd have 23 times 432 times 19. And we get that super precise answer, 188,784. That's what you'd normally write down in math class, but not so fast. Look at the SigFigs here. That first number had 3 SigFigs. We were pretty sure about it. Our next number has 3 SigFigs, and our final number only has 2 SigFigs. I can never give a more specific answer than my inputs were. So I've got 2 SigFigs here. That means my final answer can only have 2 SigFigs. Now which 2? 2 over here or 2 over here? Well, you always want to go with the biggest place value, the one that has the most numbers. If you're rounding in math class, you wouldn't round to the ones. That makes no sense. You'd round to the biggest place value. So here's 1, 2 SigFigs. So these are the 2 SigFigs we're going to keep, but we've got to round. So look to the right, just like in math class. What does the 8 do to the 8? It rounds it up. So that's going to bump it up to a 9, and now we have 190,000 as our correct rounded SigFig answers. Okay, this is what we're going to be doing most often. That's multiplying and dividing. So it's the least number of SigFigs from your input. That's what ends up in the problem. There's also some SigFig rules about adding and subtracting. So when adding and subtracting, you round your answer to the least number of total decimal places. So for example, if we had an input that was to the 2 decimal places, 1 decimal place, and 3 decimal places, oops, let's see if I can get that better highlighted, 3 decimal places, we can only have 1 decimal place in the final answer. So that's how we would round, okay? We won't use that too often, but just make sure you are aware of it. Okay, so let's get into some practice here. Now, let's try and color code this here. We want to only do problems of the same type at one time. Let's do all the multiplication and division first. So multiply, divide, nope, multiply, nope, divide, multiply, divide. Okay, so we're going to skip the add subtract one, so that's a different rule. So first things first, let's get our calculator answers. So pull up your calculator, and I want you to go through and write down the calculator answers for all those problems I've highlighted in yellow. So I want you to pause the video and then come back in a second. Welcome back. I hope you got the same calculator answers that I got, but wait, not so fast. We forgot our units. So we have a meter times a meter. That first one's going to be meters squared. Number 2, we have meters squared divided by a meter, so that's a meter squared over meter. Treat it just like you would your variables in math class. That's going to be a meter. We have centimeter times a centimeter times a centimeter. There's 3 of those, so that's going to be centimeters cubed. It's a volume measurement. And we have liters cubed over liters. Treat that just like you would in math class. This is going to be liters squared. Okay, let's extend the page a little bit here. And then we have millimeter times a millimeter times a millimeter. That's millimeters cubed. And we have meters squared over divided by meters. So just like math class is going to be meters. Okay, now we actually have the right answer. We can go ahead and round these. So in math class, you would just write down that whole answer, or maybe your teacher tells you to round to the tenths or hundredths or truncate after 3 decimals. We're going to round these based on the least number of SigFigs. So stick with me here on these problems. We've got 1, 2, 3 SigFigs, 1, 2, 3, 4. So what's my least number? 3 SigFigs. So I've got to round this number to 3 SigFigs. If you're not sure what a SigFig is, go back to the previous practice pages, go back to the previous lectures and review that. So here's my first, my second, here's my third SigFig. This is the one I want to round to. Look to the right. Will the 0 round that 3 up? Nope. We're going to have 3.33 meters squared. And you can see I have those 3 SigFigs right there. Okay, next problem. 1, 2, 3, 4 SigFigs, 2 SigFigs. That's my least number. Now, these are all placeholders. When do we start counting SigFigs? Decimals present, the first non-zero in the Pacific. 1, 2. Here's my second SigFig. Look to the right. What's going to happen? Will the 6 round the 4 up? Yep. 0.025 meters. And you can see those are my 2 SigFigs right there. These are my placeholder zeros. Okay. We're skipping the addition subtraction for right now. Okay. 2 SigFigs, 2 SigFigs, 1, 2, 3, 4 SigFigs. We're going to 2 SigFigs here. So 1, 2, look to the right. Can the 2 round the 7 up? Nope. So we've got 6.7 centimeters cubed. Okay. Now we're coming down here. 2 SigFigs, because that's a placeholder count from the Atlantic. It's only 2. 1 SigFig. Well, okay, that means I have to round to this place value, and I have 40 meters squared. That's my 1 SigFig right there. Ooh, in that previous one, we had 2 SigFigs. Okay, number 9. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Right there, we're at 2 SigFigs. Now, present Pacific, first non-zero, 1 SigFig, 2 SigFigs. Look to the right. Can the 2 round up to 7? Nope, it stays the same. So my answer is 0.0017 millimeters cubed. Okay, now we got one more right here. 1, 2, 3, 4 SigFigs. That's just product scientific notation. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're going to 4 SigFigs right here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Look to the right. Will the 7 round 7 up? It sure will. 8.958 meters. Okay. It would be nice if we just always rounded to, 2 decimals or 3 decimals, but we round the answer based on the least specific input. So you're only as good as the weakest link. Now that we've done all the multiplication division, I want you to pause the video and I want you to go through and you're going to get the calculator answers for the addition and subtraction problem. So the ones I just highlighted in blue there, pause, get your calculator answer, and then come back to the video. Okay, welcome back. Let's go over the rounding for our addition and subtraction. Let's remind ourselves of the rule. Least number of total decimal places. Okay, so here's my calculator answer for number 3. 2 decimals, 1 decimal, no decimals. Okay, so I can't have any decimals. That means I've got to round to the 1s. Can 2 round up to 3? Nope. It's going to be 53 milliliters. Okay, calculator answer, 2 decimals, 1 decimal. I'm going to be going to 1 decimal place. So here's that 1 decimal place. Look to the right. Will 6 round up 5? Yep. 26.6 grams is my properly rounded final answer. Okay, here's my next addition and subtraction problem. Let's count our decimals. 2 decimals, 2 decimals, 3 decimals. I only can go to 2 decimals. So 3.351, here's my first, here's my second decimal. Look to the right, 3.35. The 1 can't round the 5 up. Okay, here's my next addition subtraction problem. No decimals. 2 decimals. Well, that means I can't have any decimals in this final answer. I've got to round to the 1's place value. Will the 7 round up to 4? You betcha. 55 kilograms. Okay, so that's the end of page 19. If you struggled with this page, I'm thinking maybe you got hung up on identifying the SigFigs. Go back to your video notes, your Ed puzzles, go back to the previous practice pages and get some more help on those. One more page in this section. So we're going to go over page 20. Let me clear out my calculator here. Okay, first part. Determine the number of SigFigs in the following measures. You have to either use your 5-0 rules, which are back on page 16 of your notes, or you can use my little Pacific Atlantic poem. Either way, you'll get the exact same answer. Okay, so to help us out here, let's write Pacific, remember that's present decimal Pacific, Atlantic, and that is your absent decimal. Okay, number 1, determine the number of SigFigs in the following measurements. Okay, absent, Atlantic, count from the first non-zero, 1 SigFig. Present, Pacific, count from the first non-zero. 1, 2, 3, 4 sig figs. Once you start counting, you gotta keep counting. Present, first non-zero from the Pacific. 1, 2, 3, 4. Once you start counting, you gotta keep counting. All those trailing zeros count. Present, Pacific. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sandwich zeros always count. Absent, count from the first non-zero on the Atlantic side. There's only 1 sig fig in there. If we put a decimal, all of a sudden that would make it present Pacific, and we'd have actually 5 sig figs. Okay, number 6. Oh, over here we got another absent, so count from the Atlantic, the first non-zero. Those don't count, those are placeholders. 1, 2, 3. 3 sig figs. Ooh, tricky, sneaky on number 7. Present, Pacific. Start counting the first non-zero. These don't count, they're all placeholders. 2 sig figs in that number. 1, 2, 3, 4 sig figs in that number. Present, Pacific, first non-zero. Okay, absent, count from the Atlantic at the first non-zero. Those are all placeholders, they don't count. Only 2 sig figs in that number. Same thing over here, absent Atlantic, 3 sig figs, okay? It'll get easier the more you practice. If you use the 5-0 rules, you'll have the exact same answers that I just gave you. Okay, so for this next section, before I go over all the answers with you, I want you to do all the calculator answers on your own. Pause the video, come back, and we'll round them together. If you want to work ahead, here's a trick, a hint for the very last problem. So on that very last problem, look at the units. They're different. They have to be in the same units. Okay, so pause, come back when you have all your math done, please. Welcome back, ChemStars. We've got our calculator answers. Now let's get down to rounding for the right number of sig figs. So first thing, identify. The type of problem, we are doing division, so I'm going for least total number. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Okay, that's my least number. 2 sig figs. 1, 2. I got to round to this place value. Look to the right. Can the 3 round up to 1? Nope. So my final answer is 21 meters per second. Problem 2. Okay, now be careful. Absent Atlantic, 2 sig figs. 2 sig figs. I've got to go to 2 sig figs. Well, look at that. I'm already at 2 sig figs. There's no decimal here. If there was, that'd make it 4, but my final answer is 4,900 centimeters squared. Problem number 3. 1, 2, 3 sig figs, only 1 sig fig. Be careful there. So I can only have 1 sig fig in my final answer. Placeholders. So here's my 1 sig fig. Look to the right. 9 will bump that 2 up. 0.03 meters squared. Okay, number 4. These are all placeholders. 3 sig figs, 2 sig figs. These are all placeholders. Look at that, 2 sig figs, so it's the same thing. 0.00004 zeros there. 63 kilometers cubed. You could go into scientific notation here if you wanted to. That's totally fine. If you did do that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That would be 6.3 times 10 to the negative 5th kilometers cubed. And that still has 2 sig figs, so that's totally fine. Sig figs work the same way for scientific notation problems as they do as standard notation. Okay, number 5. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 sig figs divided by 1, 2, 3, 4 sig figs. So I gotta have 4 sig figs. 1, 2, 3, 4. Look to the right. 3 can't round that up. 1.668. And my units are liters per second. Okay, so this is what we're going to be doing most often with lab data. At the bottom of this page, there is a little bit of adding, subtracting practice. So remember our rule. When we're adding or subtracting, we're actually conserving the least number of decimal places, okay? So let's go back here. Okay, so we're looking at just the least number of decimal places. So now number 6, 1 decimal, 2 decimal, 1 decimal. I'm going to be rounding to that first place value, the tenths in the decimals. So I'm rounding to the nearest tenths on this problem. So just like in math class, that'll be 42.8 meters. Okay, my next problem, number 7. 1, 2, 3 decimals, 1, 2, 3 decimals, 1, 2, 3 decimals. My final answer should have 3 decimals. And let's see. Yep, that's where everything was at. So 1.773 kilograms. Number 8, now we're adding and subtracting. That's totally fine. It's in the same problem. no decimals. 1 decimal, no decimals. So I can't have any decimals here. That means I've got to round to the nearest whole number. So that's going to be 146. The 5 bumps up the other 5 centimeters squared. That's a 6. Okay. Number 9. 1, 2, 3 decimals. I'm not counting SigFigs, I'm counting decimals here, remember. I know that number only has 1 SigFig, but I'm counting decimal places. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Okay, I'm going to 2 decimal places right here. So 1, 2, look to the right. Will that 7 round up to 0? Yep. 0.11 liters. Okay, number 10. We have 2 decimals, 2 decimals, 1 decimal. So I need to go to 1 decimal. Now I got exactly 39. How can I make 39 have 1 decimal? Put in a 0.0. That shows us that we're pretty certain, well, that we are certain about that place value. So 39.0 deciliters. Okay, now we've got the last challenge problem. So my hint was that you have to make sure they're all in the same units. You can't add apples and oranges. So I chose to put all these in terms of grams. You could have put them all in centigrams or milligrams or anything else you wanted as long as they were the same. So there's my grams. Centigrams move 2 to the left. Milligrams move 3 to the left. Add them all up, we get 5.4. Now here's where we got to be a little careful. How would we round this number? Well, you might say, oh, I'm adding. There's no decimal places here. It should go to the nearest whole number. But we did a conversion. Now, when we converted, now I've got 1 decimal. I have 2 decimals here, and I have 2 decimals here. Here there is 1 SigFig. Here there's still the 1 SigFig. So I'm actually going to maintain 1 decimal place, which is right here. So my final answer is going to be 5.4 grams. Great work today, ChemStars. Over the weekend, make sure you work on the next 2 pages, which put all those SigFig rules together. Don't wait to be great. I'll see you next time. Bye.